I found out I was abandoned not through a phone call, not through a letter, but through a line on a crumpled birth certificate buried in my grandmother's attic. Growing up, I never thought my life was missing anything until I realized it had been built on a lie. I was raised in a sleepy Oregon town by my grandparents, two people I loved with my whole heart. My grandmother, Evelyn, was gentle but firm, and my grandfather had that old school warmth, the kind you feel in worn out armchairs and mugs of cocoa at 10 p. Some when the world outside feels too big. They never said I was adopted. They never told me my mother was alive. In fact, they told me almost nothing at all. They simply loved me. For most of my life, I believed my parents died in a car crash. A drunk driver. They said, instant, tragic, final. I grieved them in my own quiet way, imagining a mother with kind eyes and a father who smiled at everything I did. I would light candles for them every birthday, whispering wishes into the air, hoping maybe, just maybe, they could hear me. But life has a cruel sense of timing. It started with cleaning out the attic after my grandmother passed. I was going through a box labeled Medical and School Records Danielle, expecting nothing more than dusty immunization cards and report cards from second grade. But there it was, folded into quarters, yellowing at the edges, the birth certificate I'd never actually seen. Name Danielle Grace Erickson. Mother Elaine M. Erickson. Father left blank. My heart stopped, not because of the name, but because she was alive. There was no deceased stamp, no explanation, just her full name in bold ink, like it had been waiting for me to find it all these years. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe there was another Danielle Erickson. Maybe it was someone else's file mistakenly tossed into my box. But as I read on, I saw my hospital, my birth time, and my grandmother's handwriting scribbled on the edge of the page. Keep safe. Everything I thought I knew about my life cracked open in that moment. I confronted my grandfather, the only family I had left. He was silent for a long time before finally nodding, tears welling up in his tired eyes. She didn't want you, he whispered. We didn't know what else to do. She. Elaine, your mother. He didn't say it like a bombshell. He said it like a confession that had lived too long in his chest, a ghost that haunted him every time he looked at me. He told me she was young, ambitious, scared, that she'd begged them to take me in so she could move on with her life. She had plans, college, career, a new life without the burden of a child. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But instead, I sat on the porch that night staring at the stars, wondering how a mother could look at her own baby and walk away. There's something uniquely cruel about realizing you were never wanted. It didn't just change my view of her, it changed how I saw myself. Suddenly, every moment of my childhood replayed in reverse. The missing mother at parent-teacher conferences, the vague answers about family holidays, the way my grandmother would pause just a second too long when someone asked about my parents. I wasn't just abandoned, I was erased. What hurt most wasn't that she left, it was that no one told me. No one gave me the dignity of truth. I started researching social media, company websites, public records, anything that might lead me to Elaine M. Erickson. And there she was, a LinkedIn profile, CEO of a boutique PR firm in New York, sleek headshot, Ivy League education, married, one child, a life built on everything she chose over me. I stared at her photo for hours that night. Her smile, her hair blonde like mine, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, like mine do when I forget to guard my emotions. She looked happy. And that gutted me, because I wasn't even a chapter in her story. I was the page she ripped out and burned. But I knew one thing with certainty. I had to find her. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, but because I needed her to see my face so she'd never forget what she threw away. That night, I packed a bag, booked a ticket to New York, and made a promise to myself. No more hiding, no more silence, no more pretending that I wasn't her daughter. They say you should never meet your heroes. But what if the person you're meeting isn't a hero, but the woman who gave birth to you and walked away? I arrived in New York with a storm brewing inside me. I wasn't sure if it was rage, grief, or the kind of empty ache that comes from decades of being someone's ghost. My heart pounded the entire cab ride to the Midtown office tower where Elaine worked. I rehearsed what I'd say over and over again in my head, every word sharp, restrained, dignified. I wasn't here to beg. I wasn't here to yell. I just wanted her to see me. To see what she left behind. Her company, E2 Strategies, occupied the top floor of a glass and marble building that screamed wealth and image. Everything was polished, too polished. I felt out of place the moment I stepped into the lobby, like the past didn't belong in a place so obsessed with appearances. Still, I walked to the front desk and gave the receptionist my name. I'm here to see Elaine Erickson. She gave me a polite smile, picked up the phone, and quietly spoke into it. Then she glanced up again, her expression slightly stiff now. She's in a meeting. May I ask what this is in regard to? I hesitated, then said, It's personal. I'm her daughter. Her face changed. Just a flicker. But it was there. Confusion. Pity I didn't care. I just stood there, refusing to be turned away. After a few awkward moments, she asked me to wait in the executive lounge. The room was cold. Too white. Too perfect. It wasn't a place meant for truth. I didn't know what I expected: tears, a gasp, some kind of recognition. But when Elaine finally walked in, dressed in a tailored navy suit and heels that clicked like gunshots on the marble floor, she didn't look shocked. She looked annoyed. Danielle, she said, her voice low and composed. What are you doing here? Not how did you find me? Not oh my God, it's you. Not even I'm sorry. Just businesslike irritation. I stood up. My knees felt weak, but I met her gaze. I found the birth certificate. I know the truth. I'm not here to ruin your life. I just wanted to look you in the eyes. She sighed. Actually sighed. Like I was a meeting she hadn't scheduled and didn't want to attend. There is nothing for us to talk about, she said. You were raised well. You turned out fine. Why dig all this up now? Her words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her, but dismissal wasn't it. Because I deserved the truth, I replied. Because I spent my whole life thinking you were dead, and when I found out you weren't, it broke something in me. Her expression didn't soften. She looked around, clearly uncomfortable. There were people outside the glass walls, employees, executives, maybe even reporters. She walked to the door, opened it halfway, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't know this woman. Please ask security to escort her out. Just like that, I wasn't her daughter. I was a stranger, and she wanted the entire world to watch her erase me again. The receptionist avoided my eyes as two guards gently but firmly led me out of the building. I didn't resist. I couldn't. My legs moved on their own, and my heart, it just shut down. On the street, everything was too loud, too bright, too fast. I sat on a bench around the corner and cried, not the kind of sobs that draw attention, but the silent kind, the kind that shatter you quietly from the inside out. That day, something inside me died. Not because I was rejected again, but because I finally realized she had never seen me as her daughter. Not even for a second. I was a choice she made to forget. A chapter she tore out before the story ever really began. And yet, some broken part of me still whispered, Maybe she'll change. Maybe she'll reach out. But deep down, I knew better. Elaine Erickson had already decided who she wanted to be in this world, and I wasn't part of that picture. People always say the truth sets you free, but they never warn you how violently it can break you first. After being kicked out of my mother's office like a stranger off the street, I felt shattered, but not silenced. I couldn't understand how someone could reject their own child with such cold precision. Something didn't add up. It wasn't just that she didn't want to acknowledge me. It was like she had to erase me. There was a fear in her eyes, subtle, but there, and fear always hides a story. A few weeks later, I returned to Oregon, still emotionally raw, but more determined than ever. I needed answers, real ones, not the sanitized half-truths I'd been fed my whole life. It started with a box my grandmother had left behind. I hadn't opened it earlier because grief has a way of dulling curiosity. But now I was hungry for clarity. Inside the box were old photographs, handwritten letters, and a worn leather journal, Evelyn's journal. My grandmother had written about everything: her gardening, her prayers, her regrets. And then, on a brittle page dated just 2 weeks before I was born, I found it. Elaine is making arrangements. She refuses to name the father. Said he's married. Said she can't destroy his life. But how can she be so calm about giving her child away? I sat there for minutes that felt like hours, my fingers trembling. A married man. That's why she kept it a secret. That's why she refused to put his name on my birth certificate. I wasn't just an inconvenient child. I was the product of an affair. Suddenly, her shame made sense. Her distance. Her need to disappear me from her new life. But I wanted more than scraps of context. I needed identity. I needed to know who he was. I turned back to the letters, hoping, praying for something more direct. And then I found it. A letter tucked into an envelope with no stamp. Just a name written in small, panicked handwriting. To Elaine, from M. The letter was short, but what it revealed changed everything. I can't leave her. Elaine, you knew that from the beginning. I never promised you more than what we had. But please, don't punish the child for my cowardice. Give her a good life, or let your parents raise her. Anything but resentment. No last name, no return address, just the signature M. But the handwriting was familiar. And then it hit me. I'd seen it before on the back of a photo in the family living room, a group shot of my grandmother's church committee, with names scrawled underneath. One of them, Mark Holloway. Pastor Mark Holloway, a man I had known my entire life. My mother had had an affair with the pastor of our local church. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, so many things began to align. The way my grandmother stopped going to Sunday service after I was born. The hushed tones whenever his name came up. The strange look he'd given me once when I was 16. Helping with a food drive. A mixture of guilt and something else. Grief, maybe. I didn't know whether to scream or to laugh. All my life, I had walked past him in grocery store, shared community meals, waved hello, and he never said a word. Not even when my grandfather died. Not even when I gave a speech at my high school graduation and he was sitting in the front row. He watched me grow up, from a distance, in silence, like a secret he had buried so deep. He hoped time would erase me. The betrayal burned in my chest. And yet, I didn't hate him. Because I understood now. I was never abandoned by accident. I was born a complication, a ticking time bomb that could ruin lives if exposed. And so, I was swept under the rug of small town shame and respectable reputations. But here's the thing they didn't count on. I survived. Without their love, without their names, Without their protection, I became someone. That night, I wrote both Elaine and Mark the same letter. You don't owe me love, but you owe me truth, and I'm done living without it. I didn't know if they'd respond. I didn't even know if they'd read it. But sending that letter was the moment I finally began to reclaim myself. Not as a mistake, not as a secret, but as a woman who deserved to exist fully, loudly, and unapologetically. They say comparison is the thief of joy, but in my case, it wasn't just comparison, it was theft. Period. The life that should have been mine had been handed to someone else, wrapped in privilege and parental affection, while I was left to stitch myself together in silence. It started with a magazine. I was at the airport, waiting for a delayed flight back to Oregon, trying to distract myself from the emotional chaos of the last few weeks. That's when I saw it an upscale lifestyle magazine, the kind that features polished people with perfect lives. And right there on the cover, posing in front of a beach house in Martha's Vineyard, was Elaine. She was laughing in the photo, her arm around a tall man with silver hair and a crisp white shirt. Her other arm was wrapped around a girl about 19 or 20 who looked like every parent's dream bright smile. Ivy League hoodie, effortlessly pretty. They looked like the American dream, picture perfect, airbrushed, untouchable. The headline read, Power Couple, Perfect Legacy. The Ericksons build more than a brand, they build a dynasty. My stomach twisted. I bought the magazine without thinking, my hands shaking as I flipped through the glossy pages. The article was glowing. Of course, Elaine was described as a visionary mother and CEO, praised for her commitment to family values and empowerment. Her husband, Robert, ran a philanthropic hedge fund, and the daughter, Brittany, was a junior at Yale, studying international relations and interning with a human rights organization. It wasn't just painful, it felt personal. Elaine hadn't just moved on, she'd rewritten her narrative. In her story, I didn't exist. And Brittany had taken my place. I know how bitter that sounds. But when you see a girl being celebrated for the same DNA that made you disposable, it's hard not to spiral. I googled Brittany later that night. Her social media pages were public, filled with vacation photos, birthday parties, gala appearances. There was even a post for National Daughters Day. Elaine and Brittany smiling cheek to cheek, captioned, "So proud of the young woman you've become." The same woman who once couldn't even look at me without flinching had written proud for the whole world to see. That word hit me like a slap. What had Brittany done to earn it? Be born at the right time, with the right man under the right circumstances. Was that all it took to be loved? That week, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it all in my head, the article, the photo, that word, proud. No one had ever said that to me. Not Elaine, not Mark, not even my grandparents, though I knew in their own way, they tried. But to hear it, to be told you are worthy, that's something I'd never had. So I did something reckless, something maybe I wasn't ready for. I showed up. It was an alumni charity event hosted at Brittany's University. Elaine was scheduled to give a keynote speech on female leadership and integrity. The irony made me sick. I stood in the back of the room, watching her command the stage like she owned every molecule of air. The audience adored her. She was graceful, articulate, inspirational. I hated how much I still wanted her to see me. After the applause, I waited near the reception area. I had no plan, just a hope that maybe she'd look at me differently now, with the truth between us. But it wasn't Elaine who noticed me first. It was Brittany. She walked up, smiled politely, and asked, "Hi, do I know you? You look kind of familiar." I opened my mouth to speak, but Elaine spotted me from across the room, and her smile vanished. She grabbed Brittany's arm and whispered something quickly. her eyes darting to me with sheer panic. And then they walked away. No confrontation, no conversation, just a retreat, like I was a disease they had to quarantine before it infected their perfect world. That moment, more than any other, taught me the real meaning of rejection. Not loud, not violent, just casual, effortless, like pressing delete. I wasn't a person to them. I was a past mistake that didn't fit the new narrative. But standing there in that sea of silk dresses and champagne glasses, I felt something shift. I realized that I'd never be welcomed into that life, not because I wasn't good enough, but because I was never supposed to be seen. And that, strangely, gave me power. Because from that day forward, I stopped waiting for a place at their table. I started building my own. There's a moment in every silence when something inside you just snaps, not loudly, not with fireworks, but with a quiet certainty that you can no longer swallow pain just to make others comfortable. That moment came for me at 3:42 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was sitting on my apartment floor, surrounded by half-written journal entries, old photos of Elaine and her real family, and a still sealed envelope from Mark Holloway that I hadn't had the courage to open yet. The weight of their silence, their rejection, their carefully curated lives, it all settled like bricks on my chest. And then I thought, what if I stopped waiting for them to tell my story? What if I just told it myself? Not for revenge, not to shame them, but to give myself what no one else ever had, the dignity of truth. So I opened my laptop and I started writing. At first, the words came out stiff, formal, guarded, but as the hours passed and dawn crept through the window, I let myself bleed onto the page. Every lie, every silence, every moment I stood in a room with my own mother and felt invisible. I wrote it all. By noon, I had a 3,000-word letter. I didn't send it to Elaine or to Mark. I sent it to a journalist. A woman named Ava Morrison had built a name for herself, publishing first-person stories of abandonment, identity, and family secrets. She'd gone viral with a piece about a woman adopted into a cult and another about a man who found out his dad was actually his uncle. I didn't know if she'd care about my story, but I figured if anyone would understand, it was her. 3 days later, she emailed back. Subject, let's talk. She called me that same evening, and when she did, she didn't ask for sensationalism. She asked if I was okay. That's how I knew I'd made the right choice. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked on the article together. She fact-checked everything, down to birth records, yearbook photos, even my grandmother's journal entries. She asked me if I wanted to name names, if I wanted to expose Elaine and Mark directly. I hesitated. There's a line between accountability and cruelty, and while they had hurt me deeply, I didn't want to become a version of them, someone who erased others to protect my own story. So instead, I told the truth without venom. I wrote about abandonment, identity, and the slow burn of growing up with a question mark where your origin story should be. I used pseudonyms. I let the facts speak louder than my pain. And then, on a quiet Monday morning, the article was published. The Daughter No One Saw by Danielle Erickson. Within hours, it went viral. The comment section flooded with stories people who were adopted without answers, children raised in silence, adults confronting the families who'd buried their truths to keep their reputations intact. I wasn't alone, not even close. I received hundreds of messages, some from strangers who thanked me for saying what they never could, others from people asking if I thought their parents might come around someday, and a few from people I knew, including one from Elaine's PR assistant. I've read your story. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. If there's ever a chance for dialogue. And then one from a blocked number. No name. Just one sentence. You got what you wanted. Are you happy now? I didn't reply because I wasn't happy. Not exactly. But I was free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a secret. I wasn't a shadow lurking outside someone else's glass house. I was Danielle Erickson, a woman with a voice, and I had used it. Some people criticized me, said I was attention seeking, said I was airing private matters for public sympathy, but they didn't understand when your existence has been denied your whole life. Visibility is a form of survival. I didn't share my story to hurt Elaine. I shared it to heal me. And it worked. Because from that day on, when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw someone asking to be chosen. I saw someone who had chosen herself. When my story went public, I expected backlash. I braced myself for it, told myself that not everyone would understand, that some people might call me dramatic, bitter, or even vindictive. What I wasn't prepared for was how deeply it would hurt. Because no matter how much truth I spoke, there was still a part of me that longed for understanding. Not from strangers, but from them. Instead, I got silence. No phone call from Elaine, no letter, not even a single sentence from Mark, the man who had fathered me and then pretended I didn't exist. I had cracked open a wound decades old, laid it bare for the world to see, and they chose to look away. But others didn't. I began receiving messages from people who knew Elaine, colleagues, acquaintances, even neighbors. Some were sympathetic, others weren't. One woman wrote, "I've worked with Elaine for years. She's a good person. You had no right to try and destroy her career." Another wrote, "You're clearly just angry because you weren't included. Grow up and move on." Those words stung more than I expected. Not because they were true, but because they echoed the same message I had received my entire life. You are too much. You are ungrateful. You don't belong. For weeks, I barely slept. I would wake up at 2 a.m., drenched in anxiety, scrolling through comments, trying to convince myself that telling my story was the right thing to do. But doubt crept in slowly. Then all at once. Was I cruel? Had I opened a door that should have stayed closed? I didn't realize how lonely the truth could be. Even the people who praised me, who thanked me for speaking out, couldn't take away the ache of knowing that my truth had only widened the distance between me and the people I still, somewhere deep down, wanted to matter to. But the worst message came from Brittany. I didn't even know how she got my number. Maybe she found it online. Maybe her mother gave it to her in some desperate attempt to shut me down. Either way, the text came late one night. Just a few words. "You ruined everything. Don't ever contact us again." I sat with that message for hours, rereading it, staring at it like it might somehow change, but it didn't. And for the first time in this whole journey, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: grief. Not anger, not rage, just a deep, suffocating sadness. Because in some twisted part of me, I had hoped that Brittany might want to know me, that maybe we could find something real beyond the lies our mother had told. But now I saw what Elaine had built wasn't just a lie, it was a fortress. And I wasn't welcome inside. So I did what I always do when the world becomes too much. I wrote, not for the public, not for another article, just for me. I filled pages with the memories I had of my grandparents, the smell of my grandmother's lavender perfume, the way my grandfather hummed old country songs while fixing the toaster. I wrote about being 7 years old, climbing into bed after a nightmare, and finding safety in their arms. I reminded myself that I was loved, not by the people who created me, but by the ones who stayed. I started therapy too. At first, I hated it. I didn't want to cry in front of a stranger or peel back the layers I'd spent years burying. But my therapist asked one question that cracked something open in me. What would it mean to stop waiting for them to love you? That question haunted me. It followed me on walks, into grocery stores, into quiet moments alone in my apartment, and slowly, painfully, I realized I'd built my identity around a door I kept hoping would open. But maybe that door wasn't mine to walk through. Maybe it never was. Speaking my truth hadn't brought peace, not right away. In fact, it brought chaos, loneliness, even hate. But underneath all of that, it brought clarity. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the broken piece in their perfect puzzle. I was just the truth they didn't want to face. And if that made me inconvenient, so be it. Because I would rather be inconvenient and real than silent and erased. I always thought forgiveness would come in a grand moment, something cinematic, a tearful apology, a hug, a late night phone call filled with regret. But real life isn't a movie. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about healing a relationship, it's about letting go of the fantasy that it ever existed in the first place. It had been 5 months since the article went viral. The noise had settled, the comments had slowed, the media moved on, as they always do, but I hadn't. Not really. I was better. Yes, stronger, more grounded. But part of me still felt suspended, like I jumped off a cliff and hadn't quite landed yet. I had told my truth. I had stood up to the silence. And yet, some days I still woke up with the same hollow ache I'd carried since childhood. Why wasn't I enough? Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a message. It wasn't from Elaine. It was from her assistant again. Polite, neutral, but clear. Elaine is willing to meet one time in person, if you're open to it. My hands trembled. There was no mention of mother, no warmth, no hint of apology. Just an offer, a chance. And I had to ask myself, was I ready to see her again? Truthfully, I didn't know, but I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe just outside the city, a place where no one would recognize her, a place where secrets could be spoken without headlines. She was already sitting when I arrived, alone, no makeup, no designer bag, just Elaine, the woman who gave birth to me and then chose a life without me in it. For a long time, we didn't speak. She stared at her coffee. I stared at her. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no performance, no curated expression, just exhaustion. And something else. Maybe fear. I don't know where to start, she said softly. You don't have to, I replied. I didn't come for an apology. And I meant it. What I wanted wasn't words. It wasn't even accountability. I wanted release. I wanted to look at the woman who had wounded me so deeply and feel nothing left to prove. But she spoke anyway. She told me about being 19 and terrified, about Mark's refusal to leave his wife, about her parents, my grandparents insisting on secrecy to protect the family name. She talked about postpartum depression, shame, ambition, and the desperate need to move on. I convinced myself it was a kindness. She said that you'd be better off without me. I didn't cry. I just listened. And for the first time, I heard her not as the villain in my story, but as a broken person who made a choice. A terrible choice. One that changed both of our lives forever. I didn't expect you to grow into someone so strong, she whispered. That part almost broke me. Because beneath her shame, beneath her distance, there was pride. The same pride she had poured into Brittany. And while I didn't need it anymore, hearing it even in a fractured form was like water to a part of me I'd long thought was dead. But I didn't respond to that. Instead, I told her the truth. That I wasn't angry anymore. That I had built a life from the ashes she left behind. that I had loved and been loved, that I had survived. And then I told her something I never thought I'd say. I forgive you. Not because she earned it, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a transaction. It's not a reward you give someone after they apologize the right way. It's something you give yourself so you can stop carrying their decisions like weights around your neck. Elaine nodded. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe years of pretending had hardened her too much. That wasn't my burden anymore. We parted without promises. No future meetings, no rekindled relationship, just a quiet goodbye and a strange, heavy lightness in my chest. And as I walked away from that cafe, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner, like I had finally stepped out of her shadow and into the sun. For the first time, I wasn't a secret. I wasn't a wound. I wasn't a question mark. I was simply me. And that was enough. People often assume that healing ends with forgiveness, that once you release the weight of someone's betrayal, the story wraps itself up neatly, like closing a book and placing it on a shelf. But healing, I've learned, isn't an ending. It's the beginning of a new story, one you get to write entirely on your own terms. After that final conversation with Elaine, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't walk away feeling like I had won. What I felt was quiet, still, like my soul had exhaled after holding its breath for nearly 30 years. It wasn't euphoria, it was something deeper freedom. But freedom is its own kind of responsibility. I had spent so much of my life trying to be seen, to be heard, to be chosen. Once I stopped chasing the validation that never came, I was left with a simple but terrifying question. Now what? I could have disappeared, faded back into the shadows, let the chapter close. But I didn't want to, because the more messages I received from strangers who resonated with my story, from people who had also been abandoned, silenced, or pushed aside, the more I realized something powerful. There are so many of us. So I decided to build something for people like me. It started small, just a blog. I called it The Unclaimed Daughters, a space for women to share their stories of estrangement, reconciliation, identity, and everything in between. I didn't expect it to go anywhere, but within weeks, the inbox was full. Stories came pouring in from across the country, from a woman in Minnesota whose mother left her at a truck stop, from a woman in Texas raised by her aunt after her parents fled to start over, from a woman in Maine who found out through Ancestry DNA that her entire identity had been fabricated. Reading their stories cracked me open in a way nothing else had, not because their pain mirrored mine, but because it reminded me that I wasn't just one broken thread, I was part of a larger tapestry. Eventually, I turned those stories into a book. Not a memoir, not a tell all, but a collection, a chorus. I called it Daughters Without Permission. Each chapter belonged to a woman who had once believed she was alone. And through that book, I let them reclaim space, reclaim narrative, reclaim self. The book gained traction, book clubs picked it up, podcasts called, libraries invited me to speak. And suddenly, I wasn't just someone who'd survived family betrayal, I was someone helping others survive their own. But more than anything, I was finally living a life of my own design. I started leading workshops around the country, helping women write their own narratives not for publication, but for healing. We'd sit in circles, strangers at first, and by the end of a weekend, we'd be sisters bound by shared grief and hard earned resilience. Some people asked me if I ever reconnected with Elaine after that cafe meeting. The answer is no. And not because I'm bitter, but because I'm whole without her. The door between us isn't slammed shut in anger, it's simply closed, gently, with grace. As for Mark, I never heard from him again. But I no longer need his recognition to validate my existence. His silence no longer echoes inside me. It's just silence. There are still days when the past taps me on the shoulder, when I see a mother and daughter laughing in the park, or when I hear someone casually mention family dinners, and a part of me aches for something I never had. But then I remember this. I built my life from nothing but broken pieces, and still, it stands. Stronger, braver, real. I don't know what comes next. Maybe another book, maybe a foundation, maybe just quiet mornings with tea and the knowledge that I didn't let pain write my ending. What I do know is this: I was the girl no one claimed. I was the daughter erased. But I became the woman no one can ignore. And that, to me, is the most powerful kind of justice. For a long time, I thought my life would always be defined by what I didn't have: a mother who wanted me, a father who claimed me, a family who saw me. But as painful as my story has been, it taught me some of the most powerful truths I now carry with me every single day. And if you're someone who's ever felt invisible, rejected, or unworthy, I want you to hear this from me. You are not alone and you are not broken. The first lesson I had to learn was that healing doesn't come from others, it's something you give yourself. I spent years chasing people who had no intention of loving me the way I needed to be loved. I thought if I just proved myself, stayed quiet, or waited long enough, they'd finally change. But healing began the day I stopped asking for permission to be acknowledged and started giving myself the love and compassion I had always deserved. Second, I realized that telling the truth is powerful even when it's uncomfortable. Sharing my story publicly was terrifying. I knew some people would judge me or accuse me of making drama. But telling my truth wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice after decades of silence. And sometimes, the act of speaking out is what breaks generational patterns. Sometimes it's what sets others free, too. Another hard truth I had to accept is that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I forgave my mother not because she apologized or earned it, but because I didn't want to carry her choices as a burden on my back any longer. Forgiveness, I've learned, is something we do for ourselves. It doesn't mean the relationship has to continue. It means we choose peace over bitterness, growth over resentment. And finally, the most important lesson of all: your story matters even if no one else ever validates it. I used to feel like I was too much or too emotional for being hurt. But what I know now is that emotions are not weaknesses, they are messengers. And by honoring what I've felt, by refusing to shrink my experience into silence, I have created space for others to do the same. To anyone out there who feels abandoned, unseen, or not enough, please remember you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to rewrite the narrative, and your worth was never tied to someone else's ability to see it. I found purpose in my pain, and if I could rise from being the forgotten daughter to becoming the woman I am today, then you can too.